Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Jumpstart, and this is the Jumpstart Video Productions podcast. And in today's discussion, I'm going to throw out some terms and weave a discussion about video production around these terms. And I love video production at every level. All of us are in a different place. And as it goes when you have a boat at the dock, the rule is, as the boat owner, you have to understand this. Someone always has a bigger boat. And you could have a great boat, a boat you're really proud of. You could have a 22-foot ski boat and be out with the kids, having a lot of fun. You got the family on the boat. It's a great day for boating. And somebody rolls up in a 30-foot ski boat, the big ski nautique. Somebody always has a bigger boat. Then there's somebody to the left of you that might have the fishing boat. And they just want to do a little fishing. They got the little boat with the troller on the back. They got a little electric motor. They're just going to go off and do a little fishing. Everybody's in a different place. There's always somebody with a bigger boat. And let's acknowledge that as we explore the world of creative services, that there's always somebody with a bigger and better project. Somebody always has a bigger and better lens. Let's be honest. And of course, there's the idea that you could have a little lens envy when you're at the football game and you see somebody with the 500 millimeter Canon, the sports lens. You got a little lens envy. Somebody always is going to get a bigger and better award. Somebody's always going to have a bigger and better project. It's just the way it goes. And then there might be people that come to you and say, hey, what you did was really good with that. And somebody new in their career or somebody that chose a different career path in the creative field and likes the work you're doing. But the point being is as we explore the different areas of video production, the different areas in the creative field, that we all acknowledge that all the work we're doing is good, that everything that we're doing is important, and everybody finds their own path. So as I talk about the event videographer versus the commercial videographer, we must keep it in perspective that all of these roles are important in our business, in the industry. So let's think for a minute about the idea of the event videographer versus the commercial videographer. There are videographers who are extremely passionate about shooting weddings and personal events. And I got to tell you, this is a ton of work being in this business. The customer service alone would kill some people. You really have to have a knack for understanding how important the wedding is. Now, Jumpstart Video Productions is not in the business of shooting weddings. Occasionally, there might be a reason why we might shoot a recital or a play or some sort of pageant, let's say. But for the most part, we're in the business of video for business. But there's no reason to turn down a call if somebody says, hey, we're going to put on a production and we'd like to have it professionally recorded. That's well within the scope of what we do. But weddings are an entirely different kind of video production. And if you're going to commit to a bride, you need to be in this business and you need to do it well. So when you hear the term event videographer, you do think of a person that shoots events. But you have to remember, there are also corporate events. There are also events that are a sporting event, right? But a commercial videographer, you think of somebody who is mostly engaged in video for some business purpose. Usually the client is a company or a marketer or an advertiser or somebody who needs the video for a selling or marketing purpose. So again, both extremely important roles in the world of video production. So if you have an event videographer, you have a commercial videographer, what are their skill sets? If you need to hire somebody for a certain project and you look at somebody that's got a lot of event videography experience, they could probably do the commercial job just fine. And if you look at somebody who's been shooting company events or shooting videos about machines or shooting training videos or doing corporate video or TV commercials and such, you look at them and go, that's a commercial videographer. That person could probably do a very nice job in a wedding. But what you have with the wedding videographer is somebody who does 30 or 40 or, God forbid, 50 of them a year. That's a lot of weddings. I remember as a young person shooting weddings and how much work it was and the pressure and what is required. And that was back in the days of Super VHS and High 8 and Betacam SP and all of that kind of stuff before you had GoPros and DSLRs and all this. This is 25, 30 years ago. But the point I'm trying to make is the expertise that goes along with the niche of that particular area is very important. So if you have a videographer like the folks that work at Jumpstart Video Productions that are doing video for business every day, many of them will freelance and shoot a wedding on a Saturday. They'll do 10 or 15 a year as a second shooter, helping out those companies and those professionals that focus on weddings. And again, many of the folks that focus on weddings every Saturday can come in and shoot video in the industrial or corporate or broadcast video world during the day, during the week, and do a fine job. But really, truly, if you look at the portfolio and the body of work from individuals, you do notice that people go down different paths and they focus on one niche, and that's a good thing. So understanding that Jumpstart Video Productions is all about video for business, and the good majority of the things on our portfolio are going to be video for business, commercial video production. Let's talk for a second about Eng Style Cameras and the idea of the traditional video production person versus the DSLR filmmaker. And I just used a lot of initials there. So for those in the audience who might be in the creative field, but not know these initials, these acronyms, let's talk about ENG first. ENG is electronic news gathering. And the photojournalists, or as the TV station producers would call it, the photog. And these ENG-style news photographers are videographers. And I don't know when the term videographer first came into use. Maybe in the 80s would be my guess. But you were probably a film crew up until the 70s, and then as video cameras became more capable and being used in news gathering instead of film cameras, probably in the 70s or 80s, or probably when that transition happened, then the idea of the videographer came in. But ENG style videographers, or the person that has the background in news, this person back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, would have generally been a larger person because of the weight of the cameras. Most of those news guys, it was a male-dominated field because they were carrying 40 pounds of camera gear around with them. So the big ENG-style news cameras were also frequently used in corporate video production, or what you would call industrial video production. So a lot of the corporate video departments or video production companies that might have shot training films on 16 or 35 millimeter film in the 70s all switched to, or many of them started using these ENG-style cameras, very large television production cameras. And that crowd generally now is retired. And please correct me if I'm wrong. But it's almost a lost art, or it's almost an entire generation. And frankly, I would love to do an entire series where we interview those who started in corporate video or in television when it was shot on 16 millimeter film, and then made that transition to shooting on Sony Beta SP, or maybe even shot on tube cameras and then the 3-chip cameras and all those ENG style cameras that were huge. But let's compare that crowd for a second to the DSLR filmmaker and the generation of videographers or creatives with a camera that are perhaps even younger than me. I'm probably in the middle. So when I think of the DSLR filmmaker and try to compare that idea to the idea of the ENG style traditional video producer, or videographer rather, I think of a DSLR filmmaker as somebody who started in photography perhaps, or started down the video production path with an interest in cinema, or an interest in that cinematic look. And I would be willing to guess, or throw the idea out, that era started with Canon, and it may have started with the Canon XL1 or the Canon XL2, and this was a DV camera that probably came out in the late 90s or early 2000s, and you could use Canon's photography lenses on a video camera at a price point of about $5,000 or $6,000 for the camera. So some of the stuff shot, it was in standard definition, and then of course the XL2 could shoot in 16:9, but still was standard definition. So 640 by 480, and then maybe 720 by 480 or something like that. But this is where I think that the era of the young filmmaker making video that looked cinematic started, is with the Canon XL1 and XL2. And of course then there was the Panasonic, I can't even remember the name of it, the HVX 200, and then you could get a lettuce adapter and put some cinema lenses on this, even though the Panasonic HVX 200 had a fixed lens on it, but you could get an adapter. You could get a lettuce adapter and put a cinema lens on it. And the Panasonic looked good already. The Panasonic, though, shot 1080. It was high definition, and it was to these P2 cards that were very expensive. And that was we were involved in that. We were involved in we had a camera of that I don't know, that camera's probably still a good camera now, come to think of it. But that camera probably came out in 05, 06, 07. But the idea of the traditional videographer shooting industrial films and corporate video with an ENG style camera, and then there was this generation of those DSLR filmmakers, and they all got into video production, and there is a generational gap. There is a difference in my mind. And there are some, and these folks are probably my age or older, so maybe they're in their 50s and 60s, that lived through the era of shooting with a Betacam SP on your shoulder. And some of them embraced the change or embraced the trend to move into these smaller and more capable cameras. And some of the diehards that I know were just absolutely opposed to having these tiny cameras, they called them. These kids with cameras are ruining the business. I'll never forget that. And at one point, I think I was a kid with a camera ruining the business. I did have a Canon XL1 and an XL2, and we went and shot local cable commercials and corporate video on them. And we were side by side with videographers shooting ENG style with a full-size Beta SP package. And that was a fun era, and it's fun to reminisce about it. But the video had a look different than these DSLR or other cameras that were capable of shooting with photography lenses on them. It was a fun transition. And again, some from the generation of news photographers and corporate video shooters using the ENG style cameras embraced it, and some didn't. And frankly, it is fun to pull out the old cameras. I still have a whole bunch of them, and show some of our newer employees, some of the young filmmakers coming into the business, these cameras, these giant cameras. And frankly, some of them could still put out a good image. You could still produce a video on Sony XD-Cam HD with a PDW 700. It would look gorgeous. This was nice looking stuff. It still holds today. Those cameras are probably still relevant. And I am a little out of touch with what happens in the world of news gathering. I mean, I see video crews out shooting news all the time, and I have to admit I see a lot of news folks using some ENG style cameras, but I do see a lot of news gathering on C100s or DSLR style cameras. I see some news gathering on smartphones. In small markets, this happens, and it just boggles my mind. The term run and gun probably was invented by the news photographer using an ENG style video camera. And the term run and gun is also used in corporate or industrial video production, where you're moving from one scene to the next quickly. Because the idea is, in video production, in a tight budget program, maybe a training film, maybe a company overview video, and you want to do it ENG style, or you want to do it run and gun style, let's call it, you might have your script and you simply move from room to room or scene to scene, or if you're doing an industrial video in a factory and you need to show the manufacturing process, you go from the beginning of the line to show where the material starts, and then you move through the entire line and you move your lights and your cameras and all you roll everything down the line. That might be run and gun video production. And again, this conversation is to explore some of these terms. Just explore ideas or some of the terminology or some of these phrases in video production. And if you're a creative, or if you're working at an agency, or you're a media buyer, you're working in video production, these terms are fun. It's a fun discussion to have about what's relevant now, what was the trend then, and then it helps to explore where might things go. But I always like the term run and gun. DSLR filmmakers tend to be a little younger. They tend to be more interested in the artistic style or cinematic style of the video. They're probably more likely to shoot a little extra, one for the meal, one for the reel. The DSLR filmmaker is more likely to take a little longer to set up the shot to make it artistic. And there's a little bit of a conflict that happens. If a client is trying to do a corporate overview video and they want to move through the company and move through the offices and show a couple of different areas and show a couple of different people doing different tasks at the company, maybe show some of the manufacturing capabilities, maybe show some of the design center, maybe show people working at a front desk to show customer service, any number of shots on the shot list. The DSLR filmmaker might be a little more resistant to moving on to the next shot. And we all want to do a good job. Nobody wants to be rushed. But somebody that is doing a run and gun approach might be a little more accommodating with the client's request to wrap it up, let's move on to the next shot. Whereas the DSLR filmmaker, and this is no dig on the DSLR filmmaker, but they might be interested in, let me have one more take at this, let me adjust the lens, let me move some lights, let me have 3 or 4 more takes on this because I'm going for a certain look. And that is where business and creative can sometimes have a conflict. The idea of weddings and personal events. It is hard at times for a company engaged in commercial video production, as we always say, corporate video, training video, or TV commercials, or social media video, all with a business purpose. It is hard at times for a company set up to do that kind of work regularly, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, to staff a request to shoot a personal event or a wedding or something outside of the scope of video for business. There's also a liability issue. What if you have a really great business client? And this client comes to you for all kinds of things for their business. And then this client says, our daughter is getting married and we really want you to do the video. And you say, well, I don't do wedding videos. Jumpstart Video Productions is a production company that does video for business. So you can recommend somebody. We all know a bunch of really talented and wonderful wedding videographers. But the potential for the liability for disaster is higher if you're a company that doesn't do weddings. And then you decide to accept one because it's a really good corporate client. And then you botch it out of lack of experience. You are much better off to refer it to your friends that shoot weddings every week. And the liability is the big one. If you don't do this every week, you're not going to be as good at it. The expectations might be high because you do such a great job on commercial video work. You're better off to send it to somebody that does weddings every weekend. I am very intrigued by the world of staging. The world of staging, pipe and drape, audio visual, microphones and podiums and screens. This world is pretty intense in terms of capital investment and staffing, setup and tear down, and the physical labor requirements. And there are a couple companies in every market. Every large market has one or two or, a handful of vendors that are really good at working major corporate events, working at the conference centers. There are a number of conference centers that have their own in-house audiovisual resources, screens on the wall, projectors mounted to the ceiling, everything ready to go to walk in to use the presentation room or the conference center. But there are companies completely dedicated to putting on major conventions and major sales meetings, and I have worked with a number of them, and they are extremely impressive. Some of them are at the level where they have trucks, like a sports broadcasting company. There are companies that just do sports broadcasting, and they roll into the stadium with the truck. Typically, they're working for Fox Sports or CBS or NBC or what have you, and these companies bring in these big trucks, and you might have at a Monday Night Football, you might have a truck just for video playback and another truck just for the directing and switching between all the cameras. And another truck might be just the satellite uplink truck. And some of that kind of technology or this kind of setup with a truck, there are businesses who bring that kind of setup to a corporate event. There are video production companies who own trucks and don't do sports. They roll it in for major conferences at very large venues. And that world is incredible. So again, that world even has a range of the kinds of companies that participated in it. There could be companies that just do just do. It's a lot of work to do the projectors and screens and microphones and podiums and all that kind of stuff. And again, there's vendors at every level. Another term that I find very interesting and almost alarming in a way. I don't know if I like this term, but a friend of mine worked at ABC in New York, and he was telling me, this is 15, 20 years ago, that there was a new trend starting. And maybe 15 or 20 years ago isn't the right, maybe this was 10 years ago, let's say. More than a decade ago for sure, that the idea of the predator came into play. And that was that the news business expected that the producer would be the editor. And of course, with the dawn of the nonlinear editing system, so let's think about, even in the era of the Media 100 or the Avid coming into play, and then of course Premiere, and then of course Final Cut Pro and all of that kind of stuff, that the news outlets or the media production centers or journalists figured out that you could be the producer, but you could also cut your own story. And this became the trend, and so the assignment went to not a producer and then also an editor, but the producer was then expected to be able to edit his or her own story. The journalist was expected to edit his or her, I can't say edit today. That's a word I should really be able to say. But the journalist needs to edit their own story. And the term predator came into play. And then that rolled into, of course, corporate and broadcast video production. As you think about the number of people shooting video who are also the script writer, who is also the editor, and that person in the news business might have been referred to as a predator. The world of drones. The world of drones changed everything for just a quick second. It was going to be a huge thing. And then, like a lot of things, everybody got one. Back in the day when it first came out, of course, everybody needed to be certified. There was never a clear answer as to what the proper certification was. Well, there might have been, but then it changed. And the FAA changed it again. And people who initially thought, well, you have to be certified, I'm going to take the test. The challenge is those folks did all the proper homework and testing and certification. And then somehow things changed to where it was clear that enforcement wasn't going to be there. And the rule somehow became, please correct me if I'm wrong, the rule somehow became as long as you're not flying near an airport, nobody's going to give you a hard time. And so all of those who went out and got the proper insurance and the proper certification and even started a business where they were simply going to be a drone camera operator, then everybody got a drone. Then the drones that came out that were $500 and $1,000 and $1,500, like a lot of technology, turned things upside down, disrupted the business slightly. My belief is you should have the proper insurance and the proper certification to go out and get a drone shot. But there are certainly in some areas of the business, maybe there's some real estate companies, or maybe there's some applications where, you put the drone up in the air, you take a picture of a house and you sell it to a real estate agent for $100, and you did it with your $500 drone. This has to be a thing. I know that it is. And it's not something that we do as Jumpstart Video Productions, but you know that it exists. And how could you have a discussion about some trends in video production or some of the technology or the idea of the change between the Eng Style filmmaker or videographer and the DSLR filmmaker, and you run through all these different ideas, and how could you not think about the idea of the drone business and how that is a very young business and how much it's changed already from when drones came out. And now there is, of course, in Hollywood, companies that can put an Arri Alexa or a Red on a drone that is, that you have, $200,000 worth of equipment in the air, and the controls you have and the shots are programmed, and of course all of the liability insurance and certifications and proper permits are in place. And those companies are probably fairly safe from the threat of real estate agents buying drones and doing their own thing at a property without a proper license or without any proper insurance. It's a whole different world. So we have to think it through. What are we doing in video production, and what the right things to do are, and but the discussion today is revolving around all these terms and all these ideas of the event videographer versus the commercial videographer, and where are we in the business. And when you're making a decision about what kind of vendor you want to bring to your company to shoot video, what's our plan for creating images? And you begin shopping for video production vendors, creatives to come in and work for you. Do you really need to know this whole backdrop, this whole background, this whole discussion about all the different terms, and about videographers that might feel like somebody has a bigger boat, and then there's these yahoos on jet skis? You ever go out on the lake and there are people on the wave runners that are just not following the proper code and etiquette of being on the lake? And why not? I had a wave runner once. I loved chasing boats, riding the waves and all of this, but at some point I began to realize I'm a yahoo. And the dad that has his boat out there with his kids on it, and maybe even another group of kids being pulled in a tube, does not want these yahoos on a wave runner behind you. And there's a lot of us in the video business that watch what goes on, and you cannot judge. You cannot judge. But you also don't want to be that yahoo. And frankly, if you're a professional and you're operating a video production company and you went out and bought a drone, and then you didn't have the proper insurance, and you go to do a shot of a building for a client, and you damage a car in the parking lot by crashing into it, you're going to have some problems. But that's something you need to think through before you make the choice to go do that. And of course, the companies that say, well, because of all this technology, you're now going to be the predator, you're going to shoot and edit and do. That's the nature of return on investment in video for business. How much can we get out of the content we need to create, and that how much can we get out of that budget? And this is a crazy world we live in. And we always go with the idea that the client is always right. But in thinking through all these trends and all these terms, who is in the best position to agree with what you're asking? The DSLR filmmaker, the drone pilot without a proper license, the wedding videographer, the company that's going to bring in pipe and drape. Who's the best vendor? maybe it is a good idea to understand some of this, some of the trends, some of the technology, and some of the history of how all this came to be. Find us online, youtube.com/jumpstartvideo, and of course on Twitter and Instagram at Jumpstart Video. We are Jumpstart Video Productions, and we are glad that you listened. Have a good day.